So, and this is the only one that I'm going to go off the list just because, like I said, I'm so excited. Jim, if I would have told you when you and I met in 1990, we actually met, I think, in 91 or maybe even 90, because I came in when Triggerman was recording.
Yes.
If I would have told you all of these changes that were going to be happening, like that the sea change in the industry, what would you have said in regards to recording equipment, everything?
God, I don't know. I mean, there was so much hype and so much excitement and kind of like fear that everybody would be recording in their bedroom and not need a recording studio, and the controversy with digital was sounding not as nice as analog, and the conversions and all that stuff. So it was really hard to get an accurate perspective on where it was headed. I mean, there were times that I thought that maybe it just wouldn't happen and we'd all fall back into the analog thing and live happily ever after. But
Now,
lots
have
happened.
you found that at all to be the case? Like, because I heard Paul Miner, he has Buzz Bomb Studios out here, and he was saying that he was never really worried too much about people. Oh, because like recording stuff. Digital audio workspaces are on. They come on our phones. They come on our computers. But he
It's
says
everywhere.
he was never really worried about that because he said everyone that does that is going to eventually want to raise their game. And the majority of them aren't going to build out these crazy studios. And that's where people like you come in. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with it. It's you know, I, it it's like when you're not relying on a studio, you're pretty much stuck with doing everything yourself. And I think that's where it falls apart, because I mean, I know that I'm stretched whenever I try to take on other jobs in the studio and stuff. I just like being a recording engineer, and I've been doing more producing, actually probably more producing and less recording, which I, for some reason, I kind of enjoy. But I still like being hands on and get my hands dirty and stuff. And so yeah, I kind of thought that because nothing sounds like a nice room to record in, and you just can't do that in your bedroom or in your house, or whatever, or in your garage. Uh, so yeah, so I was pretty confident that it would all come around. That it would, I knew it wouldn't be like a novelty or a fad kind of thing, but I did, I was pretty confident that it would run its course and it would find its place, and the studio would survive along with, I mean, some cool stuff is being done at home. You can't argue that.
How now? Take us back. How did you get into this? How did you get into recording? Because I mean, you were doing it. I mean, and when I saw you, you had the board, but you also had like, I mean, you were working with a Mac, and at that time, that was state of the art.
Yeah, with oh gosh, I think I had a 40, I think it was a 40 meg external hard drive, and it was like $575 or something like that. Yeah, hard drive space was just horrible. But yeah, it was tough. I mean, it was like everybody, it seemed like everybody wanted to be a recording engineer, wanted to be involved in the studio back then, which was, I started school in 79, and the only program that was available really, what that was really worth anything, because Full Sail still wasn't really coming on too strong. But fortunately, there at Golden West College in Huntington Beach, they had a pretty awesome recording arts program. So I kind of kicked things off there, and there was just, when I graduated, there just weren't any jobs. I did a lot of applications, talked to a lot of people, and actually there was a studio there in like around Anaheim Hills. And I got into the second interview. I was supposed to meet with like the vice president or whatever, and then I never got a call back. And I picked up the register. It wasn't that the Orange County paper
Yeah.
there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And the studio got shut down. I guess they were embezzling money from Hughes helicopter health insurance or something, and that's how they were building the studio. So the FBI shut the whole thing down. That was the closest I came to getting a job, whenever I was looking. But I was just so determined. I didn't have anything to fall back on, so and fortunately I had a pretty good job at the time, so I just started buying gear. And then once I had everything purchased, I started looking for a building, which is really hard to do because nobody wants a bunch of, bands in there, a bunch of low life musicians, in their buildings. So it was pretty tough to find a spot, but I did.
That was the one on Main and Edinger.
Yeah, actually, there was another one. There were two others that nobody knows about. There was one over by Anaheim Stadium that I was sharing with my brother, and then that was short-lived. It was like 4 or 5 months, and then they found out what I was doing and kicked me out. But then I was right just about a half a block away from Guitar Center there on. Was that on Main Street?
Yeah, the one in
Main
Santa
Street.
Ana. The one there was a Norms down the street. There still is
Yes.
the Norms, yeah.
Yeah. So I was behind a building. That was a little building. So that was really my second. And then that was a pretty long stay there. And then I moved over to the South and Edinger, where the row of studios was there, and I ended up being in all. What were there? 3 of those there, and then ended up in that big one. So you've probably never been in my other buildings, have you?
I knew about it because I did a little bit of research because I did a thing. I do a thing called scene stops, and so I went to where Ice and Triggerman and Farside, where we recorded on Edinger and Maine. And even in the video, if I'll send you the link, we were like, which building was it? Because I started off thinking it was one, and then by the end of the video, I think we figured it out. And you can watch it and let me know. But
Okay.
I knew about that other one, but I'd never been to the one on Maine.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And
Yeah.
so, what kind of gear? You said that you were buying gear. What kind of gear were you using at that time?
Well, there wasn't much going on, that was affordable. So I started out with 8-track analog and a 12-channel Ramza, which I never saw that Ramza used much in studios, but I just really liked the way they sounded. So that's where I landed with that, and then I ended up with this bigger one, this 20 input one, whenever I moved over into those other buildings. But yeah, so I had the 8-track and the 12-channel console, and just outboard gear was really expensive back then, so I couldn't afford much. I did splurge and buy 2 DBX 165A compressors because compressors were really, really important, I felt. And it was true with the way that I like to record. I used a lot of the high-end compressor along with the analog tape compression and stuff as well. So but the big thing, and I still believe it, I was just a microphone whore. I knew everything about every microphone ever made at the time, and I made it a point to buy the most expensive mics, the nicest mics that I could find, because I knew that was important. It didn't matter what kind of gear you had. If you had a crappy mic, you weren't going to be able to get anything.
Did it matter to you? Like, were you at all worried when you were doing this that like, hey, I'm moving studios, am I going to be able to still retain the sound? Like, was that ever a thought in your head, or do you know enough that you weren't really thinking about that?
You know, you thinking back on it, you would think that would have been a big concern, but I think I was just so focused on moving forward. I just figured I could make anything work, and it seemed like that philosophy kind of worked for me because there were there were huge limitations in all of the buildings that I was in until that last big soundstage, you know, that you guys were in with me. Um, you know, we worked around a lot of limitations, and I would like to thank every band that I ever worked with for putting up with the crazy spaces that they had to be in. And, you know, I would put singers in bathrooms, you know, to get, you know, certain sounds, and, you know, working through sliding glass doors, and just, I was putting people in crazy places. And I really appreciated how flexible everybody was, and how trusting they were too. Because I'm not really sure that I would have even trusted myself with all the stuff that I was doing, but maybe I just projected some confidence, you know, out there, and and they stuck with me. But seemed like we all had a good time.
Was the name always South Coast Studios amongst, you know, moving from building to building? Did you always retain that?
Yeah, it did. It was always South Coast Recording Studio. Yeah.
And what was the reason, like for that name? Just you liked it. It had a good sound.
You know, I couldn't come up with anything. I did always like that, you know, the beachy kind of thing, which came from, you know, with, so it had the coast in there. But it was right, you know, South Coast Plaza was right down the street. So I
Totally.
was like, hey, how about South Coast Recording?
Now, how do you get clients in those days? Because now, I mean, if I was to open up a studio or do that, I mean, you have the internet. There's so many different ways. How were you getting clients? Like, were you going to see bands play? Were you, I mean,
You know, that was what the crazy part was. And I wake up in the night, in the middle of the night, like thinking about it, because like right now, if I knew me back then, I would sit me down and go, you are completely crazy for thinking that this is going to work out, because it's just not. um you know what, there was the little local Orange County paper that a lot of musicians, you know, were
BAM?
looking for other.
Like, was that BAM?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, yep. I couldn't think of it. So I put an ad in there every once in a while, but you know, in the long run, I think once a few people started coming, it was just mainly word of mouth. I didn't rely much on advertising. I would like throw out flyers every once in a while around music stores, things like that, which was really hard to do because nobody had a printer. You had to actually do design work and take it to a printer and pay for 500 flyers, which you might only need 20, but you had to do 500, you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, it was scary not being connected to any bands or musicians. I was just this crazy guy that wanted to be a recording engineer, and I just had this you know, this illusion that if you just had a studio, people would show up. And
That kind of
somehow they
happened.
did. That was the weird part.